Members of the Mattsuyker Canoe Club met at Cockle Creek in Tasmania's far southeast in February 2007. Our intention was to paddle out to Maatsuyker Island for our annual general meeting. The island lies 15 kilometres off the rugged south coast of Tasmania, an area with a reputation for stormy seas and remote isolation. We picked February for the trip, as at this time of the year we usually have spells of calmer weather. However, on this coast you can never be sure of the weather at any time of the year. As Jamie said at the start, we needed more wind, but he hardly dare say so, as we could have more than we bargained for later on. We were soon passing South Cape, with its impressive buttress of dolerite columns. Although the conditions were good, there was still a considerable swell that at times thundered up the base of the cliffs. Crossing Surprise Bay, we could see the distant mass of DeWitt Island before we paddled into Rocky Boat Inlet. Rounding the point before Preon Beach, the majestic precipitous bluff came into view. Preon Beach beckoned us closer, but we stayed away from the unpredictable shore break and continued across the wide bay to reach the shelter of Deadman's Cove. This is a delightful sheltered campsite with views back along the south coast. Its sheltered location is a haven for bushwalkers and sea kayakers alike. Next morning dawned slightly misty, but calm for our trip out to Maatsuyker Island. On this leg of the trip, we would visit the blowhole on DeWitt Island before exploring the possibility of negotiating a tunnel through Flat Top Island and then land on Mattsuyker. DeWitt Island, named by Tasman on his journey of 1642, has some interesting geological features, including folded and twisted rock strata, as well as a blowhole that we discovered on our 2004 trip. We took Dave, Jim and Pete to the blowhole, hoping it would be working as well as it had in 2004. We then left for the tunnel in Flat Top Island, a place guaranteed to get the adrenaline surging. We sat and watched the conditions for quite a while as waves surged through the narrow opening. As usual, Jamie was the first to decide to give it a go. A veteran of many such adventurous deeds, Jamie came through unscathed, but it was still exhilarating. Now it was my turn. I waited at the entrance for quite a while as a succession of larger than usual waves punched through the tunnel. Then I was off. The noise in the tunnel is quite deafening, with waves cascading down the rocky sides. After we had calmed down a bit, we set off for Maatsuyker Island. The only safe landing point on Maatsuyker Island is a small gulch on the northwest end of the island, Here are the remains of the wharf, now occupied by seals. Climbing the steep track up to the haulage shed, we had an excellent view back to DeWitt Island and the Tasmanian south coast. Following the well-kept vehicle track soon saw us at the caretakers' house. Mick and Pam kindly supplied us with home brew and gave us permission to use the spare quarters for a couple of nights. We all stayed outside as long as possible, soaking up the atmosphere and enjoying nature's spectacular sound and light show over the Needles. I was up early before dawn, as was Mick, who was taking the weather readings. I gazed out over the sea, watching the ever-changing patterns of light and waves. There was a reasonable sea running through the Needles, an area I hoped we would be able to paddle through before returning to Cockle Creek. Back at the house, we enjoyed the freshly baked bread made by Pam, before walking to the cliffs to take in the views.
Great. Did a bit of an explore around?
Then we visited Pam and Mick, who offered to show us through the lighthouse. As we climbed the wrought iron spiral staircase, we noticed the change running down the centre of the tower. These hold the weights that drive the rotating mechanism.
Volume converter, and at the top then there's a battery.
The Fresnel lenses and lamp are still in place, though the actual light is no longer used, having been replaced by a Tupperware light further up the hill. Outside, we got 360-degree views out to the Needles and along to South West Cape. Later that day, a change in the weather came in, with low clouds streaming past the top of the island. That evening, we once again enjoyed nature's ever-changing light show. Early next morning, there was some doubt as to our plans, but eventually we decided to head back to our kayaks and depart for DeWitt Island and Louisa Bay. I like the grating sound. Although it was sheltered in the gulch, there was quite a stiff southeasterly blowing, which could make threading our way through the Needles interesting. Once out of the gulch, we felt the full effect of the easterly, with lumpy seas and a bit of rebound swell from the cliffs. In the lee of the Needles, we could relax a little more, even if there were quite severe gusts of wind blowing through. Filming seals is quite difficult, even in calm conditions, as they seem very camera shy. Even putting the camera underwater showed only trails of bubbles and fleeting glances of the seals as they followed our kayaks. From out at the Needles, you get an interesting perspective on the Mattsuyker lighthouse. After a while, we set off down the western side of the island. This side of the island has a number of deep gulches which we carefully explored. The scenery was spectacular, jagged columns reaching up into the sky. It was now time to start paddling around the northwest tip of the island, past Walker, Flat Witch Islands and back towards DeWitt. After a long slog past Flat Witch, we worked our way around the western side of DeWitt Island and headed for a small inlet on the northern side. It was here in 1971 that a lone female poet, Jane Cooper from Melbourne, escaped from civilization for a year. With sails up, it didn't seem to take long before we were in the shelter behind Louisa Island. Because of the strong southeasterlies, we decided to camp on the sheltered northern shore of the island, rather than our usual spot at Anchorage Cove. We were soon enjoying a late lunch in a warm sheltered spot with great views of the ironbounds. Later, we braved the scrub on top of the island and spent a rather windy time enjoying the magnificent south coast scenery. That evening, we were entertained by thousands of shearwaters endlessly swooping in the moonlight. Next morning dawned smoky and calm. Some serious bushfires in the southwest tainted the sky with smoke and ash. We learned later that 30 bushwalkers had to be airlifted out of Melaleuca because of the bushfire risk. After a leisurely breakfast, we all walked across the sandspit joining Louisa Island to the mainland. A huge flock of terns mesmerised us as they wheeled overhead at our approach. We walked up the Louisa River to a broad expanse of sand, before returning and crossing the sandspit with its terns. Because the weather was so calm, we decided to follow the coastline back to Deadman's Cove as closely as we could. Jamie was up to his usual tricks of pushing the envelope by always taking the inside passage. This area has some remarkable rock formations and indentations. Of course, this would allow us to go in close through the narrow passages that are usually washed by big swells. Passing Havelock Bluff from the sea makes you realise just how precipitous and high this part of the south coast is.
I suppose the only problem is it'll be low tide tomorrow morning, won't it?
We arrived back at Deadman's Cove early afternoon and set up camp. This is one of the most attractive campsites along the coast. Rainforest greenery, a sparkling clean creek and shelter from all kinds of weather. Next morning, we awoke to a real treat. A spotted quoll boldly explored our campsite while we were standing around eating breakfast. The weather had turned southwesterly as forecast, and once out of the shelter of the cove, we made for Hen and Chicken Island.
The left-hand end of Hen and Chicken, inside in, I reckon.
The increasing swells meant there was little point in hugging the coastline. Instead, we put up sails and looked forward to a decent sail. Off South Cape, it became increasingly clear that landing at South Cape Rivulet would be difficult, and that once landed we might get stuck there as the weather was deteriorating. Dave, without a sail, was doing an excellent job of keeping up with us, but eventually we had to ease back a little so he could get some rest. He and Jamie rafted up for a while. At times everyone had a few interesting moments as the swells became larger. Pete at one stage looked like his kayak was vertical as a huge swell broke around him. Unfortunately, these incidents were difficult to capture on video.
You see Pete on that road?
Off Southeast Cape, we joked about everyone's near capsizes and were relieved that we would shortly be in calmer condition. However, once around the Cape, the wind picked up considerably and we had good sailing conditions as the swells had abated. We had a fast sail after rounding Whale Head, and we were soon entering Cockle Creek Bay. had been an exhilarating trip. We had reached all of our objectives, held an AGM on Maatsuyker Island, and shown some of our newer members why the south coast is a special place for sea kayakers.